All right, strap in, everyone. We're going deep into Scrum today.
Oh, not another Scrum deep dive.
Well, yeah, but not the kind you're probably used to.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are we diving into?
Today, it's something that might make a few people uncomfortable. Scrum is hard and disruptive.
Hmm, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, this idea comes from Ken Schwaber.
One of the big names in Scrum.
Yeah, one of Scrum's founding fathers.
Mhm.
And it really gets into the challenging side of Scrum.
Yeah, it's funny how Scrum is how it's often presented
Right.
as this simple solution
Yeah.
to getting things done, better and faster.
Yeah.
But, we're going to see there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. And our deep dive today is based on a 2024 blog post that revisited this whole Scrum is hard and disruptive idea.
Oh, cool.
We're also going to be pulling in some historical context
Oh.
to really understand where it came from and what it means for those of us using or considering Scrum.
Right, because this idea didn't just come out of nowhere. It emerged from a pretty pivotal moment in Scrum's history.
Okay, so set the stage for us. What's the backstory here?
Okay, so rewind back to 2006. Scrum is gaining serious momentum, and there's this gathering of about 30 top Scrum trainers.
Wow.
Big names. We're talking Ken Schwaber,
Right.
Mike Cohn, Esther Derby.
Okay.
They had two goals for this meeting. Sort out a big policy debate and nail down a list of core Scrum ideas that all trainers should be teaching.
So far, so good.
Yeah, seems pretty straightforward, right?
You would think,
Uh,
but I bet it wasn't that simple.
Not even close. So the irony is the policy debate ended up taking over the entire meeting. 2 days back and forth, couldn't reach a consensus.
Wow, so all those brilliant minds got stuck in a policy quagmire.
Yeah.
And what happened to that second goal, the core principles of Scrum?
That's where it gets interesting. As the meeting was wrapping up, Ken Schwaber hands out this single sheet of paper titled "Scrum is Hard and Disruptive." It just had 15 bullet points on it,
Wow.
but it really packed a punch.
So this seemingly simple document becomes a kind of underground manifesto for Scrum.
Exactly. And the reason it resonated so strongly is that it cut through all the fluff and got to the heart of what Scrum is really about. Ken was very upfront about the fact that Scrum is designed to expose weaknesses and inefficiencies intentionally.
So it's not some kind of quick fix, it's more like a mirror reflecting back.
Yeah.
All the things an organization might not want to see.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And often the issues Scrum highlights, these are the very ones that companies, try to kind of sweep under the rug.
Yeah.
Communication breakdowns, teams working in silos,
Right.
Resistance to new ideas, you name it. Scrum forces them out in the open.
Okay, now I'm starting to see where the disruptive part comes in. This isn't just about individuals tweaking their work habits. It's about shaking up the very structure and culture of an organization.
Right. And one area where that disruption can be felt most strongly is in, traditional management structures, especially middle management.
What is it about Scrum that challenges these structures?
Well, think about it. Scrum puts the power in the hands of self-managing cross-functional teams. These teams are given a lot of autonomy to make decisions and solve problems without needing constant approval from higher-ups.
Which I imagine can feel pretty threatening to some managers who are used to being in control.
Absolutely. It's a shift from a command and control style to one that's more about supporting and enabling the teams.
Now, isn't there a risk that this kind of empowerment could lead to chaos?
That's a common concern. But remember, Scrum doesn't just throw teams, into the deep end without any guidance. It provides a clear framework for self-management. You have the Scrum Master, who acts as a coach and facilitator, making sure the team stays on track. And you have the product owner, who sets the priorities and makes sure the team is building the right thing. So it's structured empowerment, not just a free-for-all.
So if an organization is really serious about Scrum, they have to be all in on this idea of self-management.
Yeah.
No half measures.
Yeah, Ken Schwaber was very adamant about this. He called partial Scrum implementations Scrum Light
Oh.
and argued that they don't work because they just end up, masking the very problems that Scrum is designed to expose.
Right.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. It might look better on the surface, but it's not going to fix the underlying issue.
So no shortcuts. Now, for our listener, let's get down to brass tacks. What does all this mean for someone who's considering adopting Scrum or maybe already struggling with an implementation?
Well, the key takeaway here is that Scrum is not a magic bullet. It's a powerful tool for change, but that change can be messy and uncomfortable. And if you're not prepared to embrace that discomfort, to really face those weaknesses head on, then Scrum might not be the right fit for you.
Okay, so we've established that Scrum can be pretty disruptive, but why is that disruption ultimately a good thing? What are the potential benefits?
Well, think of it this way. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, right?
Right.
Scrum is all about disrupting the status quo
Yeah.
in order to create something better, something more adaptable, more innovative. It forces you to address those underlying problems
Yeah.
that might be holding you back.
Now, how exactly does that play out in real organizations? Can you give some concrete examples of how Scrum exposes weaknesses and leads to positive change?
Absolutely. Let's take communication breakdowns.
Yeah.
In traditional hierarchical organizations, you often have, different departments working in silos, each with their own goals and priorities. Communication tends to flow, up and down the chain of command, which can be really slow and inefficient.
Yeah, I can see how that would create all sorts of bottlenecks and misunderstandings, especially in today's fast-paced world.
Exactly. Now, Scrum tackles this problem head-on by bringing people from different disciplines together into small, cross-functional teams. These teams work directly with the product owner, who represents the customer's needs, and they have the authority to make decisions about how to best achieve those needs.
So instead of working in isolation, you have developers, designers, testers, marketers, all collaborating closely
Yeah.
throughout the entire development process.
Right, and this forces them to communicate directly with each other, break down those silos, and develop a shared understanding of the project goals.
So less email chains, more face-to-face interaction.
Exactly. And it's not just about formal meetings. Scrum fosters a culture of transparency where people are encouraged to share their ideas and concerns openly. This creates an environment where problems can be identified and addressed quickly before they escalate.
That makes sense. But what about those organizations that claim to be doing Scrum but are really just, cherry-picking the parts they like?
Yeah.
Is that what Ken Schwaber called Scrum Light?
Precisely. And he was very clear that this approach doesn't work. You can't just implement the fun, easy parts of Scrum and expect to reap the benefits.
Right.
It's like going to the gym and only doing the exercises that you enjoy.
Right.
You might feel good in the moment, but you're not going to see the real results.
So if you're going to do Scrum, you have to commit fully.
Absolutely. Half-hearted attempts at Scrum only serve to mask the real problems. You have to be willing to embrace the disruption, the discomfort, the challenges that come with it. That's where the real growth and transformation happen.
Okay, so Scrum can be tough. It can expose weaknesses. It can challenge the status quo. But ultimately, that disruption leads to positive change. It helps organizations become more adaptable, more innovative, more effective.
Exactly. And in a world that's constantly changing, those qualities are more important than ever.
This is all really fascinating, but I know our listeners probably thinking, okay, so Scrum sounds great in theory, but how do I actually make it work in my organization? What are some practical steps leaders can take to prepare for and navigate this Scrum disruption?
Well, that's a great question, and one we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive. So, ready to embrace the Scrum challenge?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It's great to talk about disruption and positive change, but
Sure.
how do you actually make it work? How do you implement Scrum in a way that sets your organization up for success? What are some practical steps leaders can take?
Well, first and foremost, you need buy-in from the top.
Okay,
Genuine commitment from leadership.
right.
If those at the top aren't fully on board with Scrum and its principles, it's going to be a struggle.
Makes sense. Change starts at the top, right?
Hmm.
It's about setting the tone for the entire organization, creating a culture that embraces experimentation, seeing failure as a learning opportunity.
Right. And it's not just about, talking the talk. Leaders need to walk the walk.
Right.
They should be actively participating in Scrum events, showing their support for the teams, removing any roadblocks that get in the way.
So lead by example. Don't just delegate Scrum and hope for the best.
Exactly. Now, another crucial element is training and education.
Okay.
Everyone involved in the Scrum implementation, the development team, the product owner, even stakeholders,
Right.
needs to have a solid understanding of how Scrum works and what their role is.
Because if people don't understand the why behind Scrum,
Yeah,
they're going to resist it, right? Or try to do it their own way, which kind of defeats the purpose.
exactly. And training shouldn't just be a one-time thing.
Right.
It needs to be an ongoing process to keep everyone up to date on the latest Scrum practices and to address any challenges that arise.
Now, this reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about the importance of the Scrum Master. It sounds like they play a pretty critical role in all this.
Absolutely. Think of the Scrum Master as a coach,
Okay.
mentor, and cheerleader all rolled into one.
Right, right.
They need a deep understanding of Scrum, top-notch communication and facilitation skills,
Right.
and a genuine passion for helping teams succeed.
It sounds like a pretty demanding role.
It is.
Not just anyone can just step into those shoes.
You're right. It takes a special kind of person to be an effective Scrum Master.
Yeah.
And they need to be able to navigate, those tricky interpersonal dynamics that inevitably come up when you have a self-managing team.
Okay, so we've got leadership buy-in,
Yeah.
training,
Uh-huh.
a skilled Scrum Master. Anything else that's essential for navigating this Scrum disruption effectively?
Well, you've hit on some of the key elements, but, we can't forget about the nuts and bolts of Scrum, the actual practices that make it work. We've touched on communication, but let's get a bit more specific.
Yeah, let's break it down. How does Scrum actually address those communication breakdowns and silos we talked about earlier?
Scrum has these built-in mechanisms for fostering transparency and collaboration. Think about, those daily stand-up meetings,
Right.
these short, focused check-ins. Give team members a chance to share what they're working on,
Yeah.
any roadblocks they've encountered and what they plan to achieve that day. It keeps everyone in the loop, and it helps surface problems early on.
Okay. I can see how those daily check-ins could help to prevent things from falling through the cracks.
Yeah.
What about those longer-term planning and review cycles?
Well, that's where sprint planning and sprint reviews come in.
Yeah.
A sprint is a short time-boxed period, usually 2 weeks,
Yeah.
during which the team focuses on delivering a specific set of features. At the beginning of each sprint, the team gets together with the product owner to plan what they're going to build and how they're going to build it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the sprint, they hold a sprint review where they demonstrate the working software to stakeholders and gather feedback.
So it's a very iterative process, right? You're
Yeah.
constantly building, testing, getting feedback, and refining.
Exactly. And this iterative approach is key to Scrum's effectiveness. It allows teams to adapt quickly to changing requirements
Right.
and to incorporate feedback early on.
Now, what about those retrospective meetings I've heard about? Where do they fit into the picture?
Retrospectives are essential.
Okay.
They're held at the end of each sprint, and they provide a dedicated time for the team to reflect on, what went well, what didn't go so well, and how they can improve their process for the next sprint.
So it's about constantly looking for ways to get better.
Exactly. Continuous improvement is at the heart of Scrum. It's about embracing the idea that there's always room to learn and grow.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the specific practices of Scrum, but it sounds like communication really is the key that ties everything together.
Absolutely. Scrum relies on open and transparent communication at all levels. It's not just about, reporting on progress. It's about actively seeking feedback, sharing ideas, and collaborating to solve problems.
So if an organization is used to a more hierarchical, top-down communication style, adopting Scrum is really going to shake things up.
It certainly will, but that disruption can be a good thing. It can lead to a more collaborative, more engaged, more innovative work environment.
Now, you mentioned earlier that Scrum is intentionally designed to expose weaknesses and inefficiencies. Can you give some real-world examples of how that plays out?
Yeah.
How does Scrum actually force organizations to confront those uncomfortable truths?
Sure. Let's dive into that. One common area where Scrum shines a light is on inefficient processes.
Yeah.
Think about those organizations where, things get bogged down in endless meetings and approvals,
Right.
where projects drag on for months or even years with little to show for it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in action. It's like a slow-moving train wreck.
Exactly. Now, Scrum throws a wrench into that system by introducing time boxing and short iterations. Remember those sprints we talked about?
Yes.
They force teams to break down large, complex projects into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Yeah.
And by having regular sprint reviews, you can quickly see what's working and what's not, which allows you to course correct along the way.
So it's about failing fast and learning from those failures.
Exactly. It's about embracing a more experimental, iterative approach to work. Now, another area where Scrum often exposes weaknesses is in resource allocation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in traditional organizations, you often have, dedicated teams for different functions like development, testing, deployment. And this can lead to bottlenecks and delays as work gets passed from one team to the next.
Yeah, I can see how that would slow things down. It's like an assembly line where one slow worker can hold up the entire process.
Right. Now, Scrum addresses this problem by creating those cross-functional teams we talked about earlier. By having all the necessary skills represented within a single team, you can eliminate those handoffs
Right.
and streamline the workflow.
Okay, so it's about breaking down those silos and creating a more integrated, collaborative approach.
Exactly. And this ties back to the idea of self-management. When you have a cross-functional team that's empowered to make decisions and solve problems, they can work much more efficiently and effectively.
Now, all this talk about exposing weaknesses and forcing organizations to change, it might sound a bit intimidating, even scary to some folks.
It can be. Change is rarely easy, especially when it involves, challenging long-held beliefs and ways of working.
So for those listeners who are feeling a bit apprehensive, what would you say to them? How can they approach this whole Scrum is hard and disruptive thing in a way that feels less daunting?
That's a great question. I think the key is to remember that Scrum is a journey, not a destination.
Okay.
It's about continuous improvement, experimentation, learning from your mistakes.
So it's about embracing the messiness of it all.
Exactly. Don't expect to get it perfect right out of the gate. Be willing to iterate, to adapt, to adjust your approach as you go. And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
Right.
There are plenty of resources available to help you along the way, from experienced Scrum Masters to online communities, to books and articles.
That's really reassuring. So even though Scrum can be hard and disruptive,
Yeah.
it's ultimately about creating a more adaptable, more innovative, and more fulfilling work environment.
Absolutely. And in today's rapidly changing world,
Right.
those qualities are more valuable than ever.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges and benefits of Scrum, and we've explored some practical tips for implementing it effectively.
Huh?
What are some key takeaways for our listener?
Yeah.
What should they be thinking about as they contemplate this whole Scrum is hard and disruptive idea?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that Scrum is not a silver bullet.
Right.
It's a framework that requires effort, commitment, and a willingness to embrace change.
It's not a quick fix. It's a long-term investment in building a better way of working.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's important to be realistic about the challenges that come with Scrum. It will expose weaknesses, it will disrupt the status quo,
Yeah.
and it will require you to step outside your comfort zone.
But those challenges are also opportunities, right? Opportunities to learn, to grow, and to create something truly amazing.
Absolutely. If you're willing to embrace the hard parts, to lean into the disruption, Scrum can be an incredibly rewarding journey. It can transform not just your organization, but also your own personal approach to work and leadership.
Now, speaking of leadership, this whole Scrum is hard and disruptive idea has me thinking.
Yeah.
If Scrum challenges traditional management structures so much, what does that mean for the future of leadership?
Yeah.
Are we moving towards a world where hierarchical organizations are a thing of the past?
It's a really interesting question, and one we'll explore further in the final part of our deep dive. So we've seen how Scrum can really shake things up when it comes to traditional management, right?
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think about how this framework, something designed for software development, is having such a big impact on the way we think about leadership and like how organizations are structured.
Yeah, it really is. And it brings up some really interesting questions about the future of work, right? I mean, are we heading toward a world where those, the old school top-down hierarchies are just a thing of the past?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in all the excitement and say, okay, managers are done, but I'm not so sure it's that straightforward.
Yeah, you're right to be a little cautious. I don't think we're going to see managers disappear overnight or anytime soon, really. But I do think that that their role is changing, and it's changing pretty fast, especially in places, organizations that are really embracing these agile ways of working like Scrum.
So how is the manager's role changing in a Scrum environment? What does good leadership look like when you have these self-managing teams?
Well, in a traditional hierarchy, the manager is often seen as the person who gives orders, right?
Yep.
Controls resources, makes all the decisions. But in a Scrum world, that kind of command and control approach, it just doesn't work.
Right, because the power dynamic has shifted, right? The teams are the ones making decisions about how to get things done, how to achieve their goals.
Exactly. So the manager's role, it becomes less about directing and more about, supporting, enabling, empowering.
Okay, I get that. But what does that actually look like in practice? Can you give us some specific examples?
Sure. One of the most important things a manager can do in a Scrum environment is to create a safe space, a supportive space for the teams to experiment and to learn. Remember, Scrum is all about embracing failure, seeing it as a learning opportunity. But that can be really tough for people who are used to a culture where mistakes are punished.
So it's about fostering a growth mindset, encouraging people to take risks, to try new things, and to learn from their setbacks.
Exactly. And that requires a different kind of leadership, one that's more about coaching and mentoring than directing and controlling.
Now, another thing we talked about is how Scrum, how it often reveals those weaknesses and inefficiencies, right? I imagine that can be pretty uncomfortable for some managers who are used to, being seen as the experts, the ones with all the answers.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It can be a humbling experience for managers to see their teams uncovering problems that they themselves may have, missed.
So what's the key to handling that? How can they embrace that vulnerability without feeling threatened?
Well, I think the key is to shift from a mindset of, I know everything, to a mindset of, we're all in this together. It's about recognizing that everyone on the team has something to contribute and that the best solutions, they often come from collaboration, from that collective intelligence.
So it's less about being the hero leader who swoops in to save the day and more about being a facilitator, a guide, someone who helps the team to tap into their collective wisdom.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that shift in mindset, it can be really liberating for managers. It frees them up from the pressure of having to have all the answers, and it allows them to really focus on creating the right conditions for the team to succeed.
That's interesting. So instead of being the expert, the manager becomes more of a curator of expertise.
Exactly. They help to connect people with the resources they need, with the support they need. They remove roadblocks, and they create an environment where everyone feels empowered to do their best work.
Now, this all sounds great in theory, but I know there are managers out there who are probably thinking, okay, well, if my teams are managing themselves, what am I actually doing all day?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And the answer is there's still plenty for managers to do in a Scrum environment.
Hmm.
It's just that their work might look a little different.
So what are some of the key activities that managers should be focusing on in this kind of Scrum context?
Well, one really important area is building relationships. Scrum is all about collaboration and communication. So managers need to be spending time getting to know their team members, understanding their strengths, their weaknesses, building that trust.
Okay, so it's about fostering those personal connections that are so essential for teams to work well together.
Exactly. And that takes time and effort. It's not something that you can just check off a to-do list.
What else is important for managers in a Scrum environment?
Well, another key activity is removing impediments. Scrum teams are designed to be self-managing, but that doesn't mean that they don't run into obstacles. It could be anything from technical issues to bureaucratic roadblocks to interpersonal conflicts.
So the manager's kind of like a problem solver, clearing the way so the team can really focus on their work.
Precisely. And this requires a different set of skills than traditional management. It's less about giving orders and more about, listening, negotiating, finding creative solutions.
Okay, so we've got relationship building, impediment removal, anything else?
Well, another important role for managers in a Scrum environment is to act as a champion for the team.
Yep.
They need to be advocates for Scrum, for the process within the larger organization,
Hmm.
helping to educate others about the benefits of this approach
Right.
and to push back against any resistance to change.
So it's about being a change agent, helping to shift the culture of the organization to one that's more aligned with these principles of agility.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that can be a challenging role, but it can be incredibly rewarding.
Now, you mentioned earlier that Scrum can be, kind of humbling for managers.
Yeah.
I imagine it also requires them to develop some new skills and ways of thinking.
Absolutely. Traditional management training often focuses on, things like planning, organizing, controlling. But in a Scrum world, those skills they're less important than things like communication, collaboration, emotional intelligence.
So it's about being more people-focused, more adaptable, more comfortable with ambiguity.
Precisely. And that can be a big adjustment for some managers. But it's also an incredible opportunity for growth and development.
It sounds like Scrum isn't just changing organizations, it's really changing the very nature of leadership.
I think it's a really fair assessment. Scrum is challenging us to rethink what it means to be a leader in this day and age. It's no longer about having all the answers or being the one in control. It's about empowering others. It's about fostering collaboration. And it's about creating an environment where everyone can really thrive.
And that brings us to our final thought for you, our listener. As we've explored in this deep dive, Scrum is hard and disruptive, but it's also a powerful tool for positive change. It challenges us to look at our weaknesses, to rethink our assumptions, and to evolve, both individually and collectively. So the question for you is, are you ready to embrace the challenge?